that's all you're going to hear from me, and I'm going to hand it over to Sam.
Good evening. My name is Sam Fletcher, and I'm the Executive Director of the New York State chapter of NASW. I want to welcome you and thank you for continuing this journey with us. I want to give a little background of what this initiative is, Revolutionize the Profession. So this came about because one of our board members, actually our student board member, was upset by some of the things she was seeing and some of the reactions that she was seeing from our national office. And we ended up having a meeting and discussing what can we do. And out of that meeting, with me, Amelia, and her, we came up with the goal of let's change the profession. We like to keep it simple and easy, and let's just do this, because we acknowledge that there's racism in the profession now, and there's a history of racism within the profession. There's a history of not amplifying BIPOC voices, and so that is what we're going to do. So the way this works is we're starting with a series of town halls, and during the town halls, we're identifying goals. So tonight we're focusing on schools of social work, and we will be focusing on schools of social work for the next 2 months. There's a core group of BIPOC social workers who've been meeting and setting this up. That includes Devin and Cecily, who are our facilitators tonight. This group has set up the next several months of meetings and the topics for those meetings and who will co-facilitate them. So I can't thank that group enough for what they're doing and the amount of work they're putting into this. I just also want to talk about that once we're done setting the goals, this will move into a work group type scenario, and each work group will be led by a BIPOC social worker or co-led by BIPOC social workers. I want to acknowledge our white allies and the white allies that continue to join these conversations with us. I appreciate the fact that you're staying with us through these conversations and doing the work of allies of listening and learning. To continue your allyship, I really encourage you to join our work groups, because when I talk about the work groups being led by BIPOC social workers, that doesn't mean the BIPOC social workers are carrying the load and doing most of the work. We need groups of people to make, many hands makes light work, to do the research and create the action steps that are needed to meet those goals. Once we have the goals and action steps, we plan to contact the stakeholders in each area. So we already set the goals for NASW New York State, so we will be very transparent with you on the goals and action steps and how we're implementing them. And then for schools of social work and clinical practice and macro practice, we will reach out to CSWE, we will reach out to the Deans Associations, we'll reach out to deans in New York State, and we'll present our findings to them and work with them to help implement these changes in their programs, and then also with employers who employ large numbers of social workers. So I just wanted to let you know this is a long-term project, and I'm so appreciative of the commitment of so many people that are making this happen. Again, I just want to thank not only our BIPOC facilitators and the team of BIPOC workers who are setting this up behind the scenes. I want to thank our participants, because if you've attended our first 2 town halls, they were very powerful, and that's because of the voices. I just want to say how much I appreciate the work you're doing and how you're explaining how racism is happening to you personally, how it's happening in your organization, so that we can set these goals. You've truly created a brave space and a powerful space, and you are making a difference already with the work you're doing. And again, with our white allies, I again want to thank you for coming. And some of you come week after week and you tell me this is hard. It is hard, but it's harder for our BIPOC social workers and our BIPOC community members who face racism every single day. So people with white privilege, white people, we have to sit in our discomfort, and we have to listen to the stories, and we have to do our work and our allyship work. And I hope you continue to come to these. I hope you continue to listen and learn. And I hope you don't give into what happens a lot whenever a moment is over in the civil rights movement and Black Lives Matter movement, when a moment is over, a lot of times we hear, we're sick and tired of talking about this. We don't want to hear about this anymore. I'm asking, let's push through that, and let's also hold other white people accountable to push through that, because I'm quite sure BIPOC people are sick and tired of living in the United States and what they face here. So I don't want to take any more time today. I want to hand this over to our wonderful facilitators, Devin and Cecily.
Good evening. Good evening, all. Thank you so much, Samantha, for your introduction. I'm just going to say a few words, and then I want to turn it over to Devin so she can introduce herself. My name is Cecily Mitchell-Harper. I am so pleased to be here again. So grateful for the opportunity to be here to help facilitate a conversation. I really appreciate it. I don't know if you guys were here on the session that we had back in August. That was so powerful, so meaningful for me. So I'm just so thankful and so grateful to be back in this space again. And we're actually going to be talking about some of the things that came up in that August conversation, specifically around what's happening in BSW, MSW educational programs, in classes, and specifically looking at field placement. Because a lot of that came up the last time, and I said, oh, we have another session coming up where we're going to be discussing this. So here goes that session. This is just the first session of, as Samantha said, one of many in which we're really going to be looking at what's happening in field placement, what's happening in classes. So before we actually get started in the discussion, I do want to turn it over to Devin so that she can introduce herself.
Thank you, Cecily and Sam. Thank you for your introduction. Everyone, I'm so happy to be here with you all to have this discussion. This is a discussion that I've been wanting to have for a very long time, so I'm so glad that we have a platform. Even though we have to do it on Zoom, I think it's so much better that we have people from all over the country participating in this discussion, because this isn't something that has only taken place within New York State. This is a problem across the board within the profession, and so I'm so glad to have people from all over to participate in this conversation. So I'm not going to take up much time right now. Let's just kick it off.
All right. Thanks, Devin. Yes, Devin, thank you for highlighting so many people from across the country. I'm seeing that in the chat, and that is so, oh, it just like warms my heart. I love it. Thank you so much all for being here, seriously. With everything that's happening, just taking time out for this is like really cool. So I just want to say thank you again. So the way this really works is we don't actually want to talk too much. I don't want to talk too much. Devin doesn't want to talk too much. We really want to open up a space so that we can actually start having a conversation sort of similar to last time about, some of our experiences within, and we're going to look specifically at field placement. So some of our experiences, personal experience, it could be a personal experience that you want to reflect on. It could be something that you have heard about, that you know about, that you have been thinking about. That's totally fine as well. Because how this works is that we're really starting from looking at really narratives. What's coming up? What are the narratives that are coming up? From there, we can identify some themes, we can identify trends, understanding that these are larger issues. And then from there, look at how can we develop goals? How can we really think about, okay, well, we know this is happening. We know that this is not right, and we know that it needs to change. And the time has come that it needs to change. So what exactly, how do we get there? So this session is an opportunity to really dig into that a little further, but it starts from our own experiences and start from our own thoughts and feelings about this. So really, we want to create a space where we can start engaging in that conversation. As I said, I don't want to talk too much, and Devin doesn't want to talk too much as well. So if you can just specifically think about, any thoughts, any experiences that you've had, that you know of others have had. This is a safe space. We want to open it up, but at the same time, if you're not comfortable, that's totally fine. Whatever you want to share. Specifically looking at field placement, internships within social work, education, BSW, MSW programs, could be anything. If it has something to do with classes, that's totally fine as well. We do have other sessions where we're going to focus on the educational, classes and what's happening in class. But that's totally fine if you want to go there as well. That's fine. As you guys are talking, I will ask clarifying questions. Devin will ask clarifying questions if need be. And we also will be taking notes and helping to identify some goals that come out of the conversation and the discussion. As I said, it's really open. We want to hear from you. We want this to be a space where we can start engaging in a dialogue. Yeah. Eddie. So Eddie, I'm seeing in the chat, trauma from a placement.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. So I'm a current MSW student, recently just graduated from undergrad, and my placement was completely full of racism. I almost dropped out after my supervisor told me in supervision that I should find a different profession because I make white people uncomfortable. This is something that has translated not just within the placement, but within the classroom. And I know that we'll talk about that later. However, I think that in thinking about this conversation about racism, I think it's important for us to expand that topic to understand how racism has been operationalized, not just within the US, but globally. And that is really talking about whiteness. I go to a predominantly Latin school, and there is so much racism and anti-Black ideology that runs rampant because within Latin communities, we do not have context about racism. What we do have, though, in our respective countries is pigmentocracy, colorism, and colonialism. But those topics are not covered within our classes. So, you know, when we think about like Latinidad and how that has perpetuated whiteness and perpetuated racism, it has completely flattened Blackness, indigeneity, you know, anything to really talk and confront these issues. And I think that this is something that is really rampant. And I think that, you know, with my prior supervisor, it's something that we see often, because another thing that she would do would be invalidating statements. She would say to me, you know, you catastrophize your Black clients' problems. I'm a Jewish woman, so I know what racism feels like, and we've suffered, so you shouldn't be talking about this. You know, and it's really disconcerting because these are narratives that have conflated the tensions between Black and brown communities and Jewish communities, as just one example. So I think that broadening the conversation to include whiteness is extremely important.
Eddie, thank you. Just first off, thank you for sharing your experience. I'm so sorry. And I don't mean that in, you know, kind of like this trite way. Like, I hear these stories, it resonates with me personally because I've experienced not, obviously nothing, you know, not the same thing, but it's there and it's real. And I also thank you for bringing up some of these that we need to expand. So even how we're talking about racism, that really, and somebody put into the chat, you know, professionalism, and yes, we're going to get into that professionalism code, right, for performative whiteness, and really looking at whiteness, right? What does that mean? How does that show up in schools? How does that show up in organizations? How does that show up in field placement? So thank you for that. And there's so much there. And so I just appreciate you opening up the conversation. And again, thank you for sharing from your personal experience. Anybody else want to share anything, any thoughts that they have, any experience that they've had? Totally fine.
Hi, I'm Kenya. I'm living in Maryland. Cecily, I think we may have met before at school because you look very familiar.
Yes, yes, I do remember you.
Okay, great. So this isn't necessarily about like my field placement, but it is definitely about, I think, to Eddie's point about centering on whiteness and what that looks like. Thinking about some of my experiences, particularly in class. One class I had was practice with at-risk youth. And I remember this day very clearly because Someone had made some sort of comment, and we get into a conversation about statistics versus raw numbers, understanding the population that you're serving in the area that you're serving, right? Because going to school in Philadelphia is going to be different than Idaho. And so one of the students, my classmates, made a comment about one of the books we were reading being true because most of the hungry families in Philadelphia were Black women. And I'm like, well, yeah, but we're in Philadelphia. So you want to really consider where that statistic is coming from. You don't want to just say like, oh, this one book about this one area is true because of what I see in Philadelphia. So I challenged her. The very next class, we had a 2.5-hour session about how they felt attacked. And I was sitting there fuming the whole time because I'm like, is this happening right now? I didn't cuss you out. I didn't, yell at you. I just said, hey, so let's think about where we are. Let's think about the difference between being in a city like Philadelphia that has the highest rate of deep poverty. It's a city that's predominantly minority and all the stuff that kind of goes with it, but also juxtapose that against like what it looks like to live in the Midwest. So don't like center it just on this one book that this one person must be true. It was written by a Black person. So this is solidifying all the negative stereotypes that I already had in my head. And I'm angry because you told me I was wrong. And then we had to process their feeling attacked, not me feeling attacked in that moment, because at the end of the day, I was actually being attacked because my feelings were never considered. And I wish I could say that that was like a unique experience when I really think about some of the classes I had. I enjoyed a lot of my classes, a lot of my classmates, but thinking about the conversations in field practice, in our field practicum, thinking about one of the students who, walked up to me after our first week in class saying like, I've never had to think about being white, just like you've never had to think about being Black. And I'm like, whoa. Wow, and it's things like that. And so, yeah, and I think that even we called it at Penn, the racism sequence, really thinking about what that looked like because it made a lot of people uncomfortable. And here I am sitting here like, this is my everyday life, y'all. And it's like, well, what about women? What about this? What about that? And it's like, no, what about how this country was created? On the erasure of indigenous people, on the backs of Black people, and then our oppression system was built out of that. This is what we're talking about. That is the foundation for what we have here, what we have in front of us, but they didn't want to have that conversation. And so sitting in class was maddening at best. And of course, that then translates to how, for me, my concern about people being put into field, wanting to be saviors, getting upset when their clients don't do what they're supposed to do, and how dare they not listen to me, and not having an instructor challenge that thought was like, are y'all kidding me right now? This is not what it's supposed to be. And so for me, again, I love social work. I love, what I do, but that will always stick with me for the rest of my life.
Kenya, thank you so much for sharing. I do remember you, and we were in the same program. So yes, one of the things that, and I'm also seeing what's coming up into the chat, and that's totally fine as well. I love what comes up in the chat as well. One of the things that I'm seeing a theme, both in what Eddie said and also Kenya and what you were talking about, is, this white people start feeling attacked, uncomfortable. And then the conversation becomes about, well, now we have to make sure that white people don't feel attacked and are feeling a little bit more comfortable. Whereas what continues to happen is that for BIPOC, social workers, and we're talking about social workers in particular in the setting, whether it be students or, practitioners, that their feelings continue to be unheard, continue to be silenced, that's somehow not important. What's more important, and again, this is a function of whiteness, what's more important is that the feelings of white people, that we have to take care of that. And that's something that I see as a theme that has come up both in what Eddie said and also in what Kenya, what you've also talked about, that's something. And yes, white fragility. So White Fragility, that book that she really talks about that. this idea that, you know, we have to make sure that white people are feeling safe and comfortable. Then we can have a conversation. Meanwhile, it continues to erase and silence the experiences and feelings of people of color.
Cecily, if I might add as well, thank
Yes,
you,
please.
Eddie and Kenya, for sharing your experiences. Something that came to me was also language. So we spend so much time within the field and especially within the classroom talking about language and the things that we should not say. Like, for instance, people say, don't use the word crazy to describe people. I also think that what we never talk about is that do not describe BIPOC people as aggressive or as aggressors. And when that happens, I've sat in a class where, similar to you, Kenya, we had to have a discussion for almost 3 hours about why that's inappropriate. No one ever questions why you shouldn't call someone crazy or things like that. But when you say like, hey, I don't like when you, that's not what this is, or you shouldn't say that like I'm aggressive, or because it has all these different connotations, people start to feel quote unquote attacked. And that's another thing, like you can't just say so freely that BIPOC people are attacking you because what you're actually saying is something completely different. So I think that's just another thing that we need to pay attention to is language.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Devin, for highlighting that.
And hi, this is Florence. I just want to also acknowledge that social work just has to acknowledge the fact that they were built on a racist structure, right? So I think unless there's some acknowledgement about that and the fact that all of these theories that we're supposed to be using now, number one, they're old, right? And number two, they didn't consider Black people, right? So the expectation that all of these theories and the way that you're supposed to work with certain client populations is supposed to work, it doesn't acknowledge people's trauma. It doesn't acknowledge the systematic racism that goes on that hinders someone from being able to be well. And then also a lot of my white colleagues come in and they want to save people, and you're not the savior, and you're not going to save Mr. Jones from what he's going through, right? And I agree with the words that are being used, the connotations, the microaggressions that come out. So if it's coming out to me as your colleague, I can only imagine what you're doing to clients and what you're saying to clients that may belittle them, belittle their community, and just belittle their very existence. So I think once there's an acknowledgement about that and schools really start to recognize that even the professors that's been there that can't even have the conversations with their students and don't know how to have those conversations, then we're not going to get anywhere. And I agree with what Kim Young said in the chat, that being a Black professional or even a person of color in the profession is exhausting, because even when you're doing your work, you're expected to have the answer for all Black people, do everything, and it's exhausting every day. Because if I don't feel safe even leaving my home, and then I have to go to work with that baggage on my back, not feel safe in my job, it's a lot to carry. And there has to be some acknowledgement of that and some recognition, because I think we're training, you know, people like Eddie, who I could tell just by the way he spoke and his passion, you know, in the wrong way. And that could really turn people off and put them in the wrong direction, where we really need folks like Eddie and I believe Kenya, who spoke in the field.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Florian, is that how you pronounce your name?
Yes, it is. I just have my baby with me. That's why I'm off camera.
Oh, no, it's okay. No worries. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. One thing that you brought up, and then I do want to think about some goals that just in this brief conversation that we've had, there's so much here. It's so rich that we're even starting to identify some goals. One thing that you also brought up is, and this came up in previous town halls, really looking at the history, right? The history, social work profession, we have to remember that, we have to acknowledge that. This is not new. The social work profession, how it's rooted, how it's framed, the history of it, and the fact that it was actually built on systems of oppression and systems of racism, and very much rooted and steeped in whiteness. So being able to unpack that and have a space to unpack that is really, really important, and just needs to be acknowledged. And this is why the first town hall, we really just looked at the history, right? How do we have to just acknowledge where we came from in terms of, and thinking about, okay, why are we at this particular point and what do we need to do to move forward? So I just appreciate what's coming up so far, and also just please continue to put things into the chat. That's totally fine as well. If you just want to, continue talking in the chat, that's fine. But we do want to hear your voices as well. One of the goals that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing, that's coming up is the role of professors, the role of field instructors, the role of faculty, as well as supervisors in field placements, and what their role, right? When things are coming up, both in field placement and also in the class, their role to be able to call things out, their role to be able to, engage in that conversation in a way that kind of pushes back and in a way that disrupts some problematic narratives. Because what's happening is, we're experiencing this, and it's like, well, where are the professors? What is their comfort level engaging in these conversations and being able to push into that? So that's something that it's definitely coming up for me. I think is a goal that's coming out of this, is we really need to think about how are professors, field instructors, supervisors trained? How are they given the tools? And what do they need in order to be able to disrupt, in order to be able to, effectively in that space, disrupt where necessary, call out where necessary, so that they're not continuing to just, okay, well, we're gonna appease white people, we're gonna appease their experience and make sure that they're okay, and then meanwhile you're continuing to silence, BIPOC social workers and social work students. Devin, is there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I think Dawn was about to make a comment though.
Okay.
Thanks, Devin. So good to see you. So there's so much. So when you're talking about professors, field instructors, being able to address inappropriate comments, traumatizing comments that are made in the classroom for BIPOC people. And it's like, and someone just said this recently, this was a student. Do I have to be the professor and address what was said? I'm a student. Why isn't the professor addressing what was said? And so I remember, even though it was kind of back in the dark ages when I was in school, but here we are in 2020, and the same things are happening to students. I have students coming into my office in tears because things are being said and they weren't addressed. And I think part of what's going on with professors is that they don't have the tools to know how to address what's being said, number one. Number two, fear. They rather appease the white students instead of really hearing what was said and how it's traumatizing the BIPOC students. And so trainings have to go on with professors. So I think back in the, they definitely did not do this type of training years ago when many professors were in school and they were learning how to be professors. And now we're in 2020 and it's just like, it's not going to be tolerated. You have to figure it out. And so schools have to really invest in trainings for their faculty on a regular basis to be able to give them the tools to know how to address a number of issues. Something else I just wanted to touch on was when I was in school, every time a comment was made about Blacks, Latinos, or indigenous people, it was always pathologized. We were always, in regard to the family structure, just every part of our being was pathologized. And there was no people didn't even have it within themselves to see the strengths of families of color, to see how, despite all that they've been through, they were still standing, that we're still here today. And so for me, that was always, it just really bothered me. And, you know, I would speak up in class, but we're so much more than just talking about what may be deemed the deficits. Everybody, every group has deficits. But we have a rich history, each group. We have, we're beautiful people inside and out, and just all the strengths of how we've survived to get to this point that we're at right here, right now. And so with the training, it has to encompass a lot of different facets, because people, they have the same old records in their mind, you know, what their grandparents, great-grandparents, so on and so forth said. And they're not seeing how they have to change the record. They have to change the record. It has to be done now, because it's not acceptable. It's never been acceptable. And it's definitely not acceptable now. Like I said before, I'm just sick and tired of being sick and tired. But this is a time that change can really occur. That when we're sitting in the classroom, I don't want to see from 20-something years ago when I was in school, that I have students coming to me with some of the same issues. That shouldn't be happening. There's a disconnect somewhere. And so these are the types of things that we have to develop a plan of action for, to address, you know, trauma in the classroom, field instructors saying inappropriate things to their students. Instead of supporting them and listening to what the student is saying, it's just systemic racism in some of these field placements. Call it what it is. And for some students, they're not sure how to navigate these predominantly white waters. And so, especially if there's not another person of color who they can go to really talk about, how do you navigate the white spaces where they're at? And sometimes they won't even articulate what's going on because they don't want it to seem like, oh, I'm just using racism. And it is what it is. Speak your truth. What's going on? You know what racism is. You know how it feels. You know how people treat you. So, I'm sorry, I just went off a lot of different bullet points, sorry.
No, Dawn, you absolutely do not need to apologize. No apologies necessary. We appreciate everything that you're bringing up. So real. And one of the things that's also coming up in the chat is, okay, how much training? And I just also want to just acknowledge, like, we are in 2020, and you've referenced it several times in what you just said. We're still having this conversation in 2020. We're still seeing the same things come up over and over. And I agree. I'm sick of tired of being sick and tired of having to have these conversations over and over and over again, and seeing the same things continue over and over and over again. And I see some other folks nodding their head. Yeah.
I think also going along with what Dawn was saying, and thank you, Dawn, it's also good to see you. You mentioned some things of just about, you know, professors, and I'm thinking a lot about power, and especially within the field placement too, and I would like to kind of talk about that amongst everyone. When I have had situations or just instances of racism within field or within class, I noticed that, like, my reluctance to do anything or to say anything was because of the power dynamic that existed, and that ate at me.
Oh, hi.
It it was awful, and it wasn't until like I spoke to different professors and administrators that were white, and they were ready to go to war for me, and I was like, well, I need to do that. Like, I need to be able to, because if I don't do it myself now, like, when am I just never going to do it? And I cannot be afraid at all times in my life that, like, okay, but this person is my supervisor, this person's my professor, my boss, like, does that mean that I cannot call you out? And so when it comes to like trainings and having these discussions within the classroom or with your field supervisors, like, students also need to feel comfortable and as if there's a space for them to call these things out without any repercussions, because there shouldn't be any. And so there have been a lot of cases where students don't say anything, or they just kind of keep on keeping on because they just want to get this degree. The program's only a year, or it's only 2 years, and they're almost done and they can push through. But I think right now what we're seeing is a lot of students are fed up, just like everyone has been saying, and is requiring more of their professors and of their supervisors. And students are calling out their professors, and people are a little bit stuck and they don't know what to do. I'm talking like administrator wise. And so the answer is typically we'll do more trainings. So these trainings need to require action steps, because it's not enough to just continuously educate, because these aren't things that our professors do not know. They're very well aware of racism and all the different ways that racism exists. So just thinking about action steps that we would want our professors to do in the classroom or in field. And I kind of want to open that to anyone if you have any ideas for what that might look like.
Thank you, Devin, for bringing that up and highlighting power, because power really is at the root of all of this. So yes, let's open that discussion up. Thank you, Devin.
Oh, I will just say something. I raised my hand. I didn't want to be too. I raised my hand. I didn't want to be too rude. Hi guys. Hi everybody.
Hi.
So I wanted to say something back to you, Eddie and Kenya, and Dawn and Devin. So I'm gonna try to like make it separate, but kind of like, I don't want to take up too much time. So Eddie and Kenya, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. It's terrible. It's comforting to know that I'm not alone in these experiences, but it's unfortunate that we are experiencing these things, and it definitely needs to change. My major concern is our cohorts or, colleagues that are that are uncomfortable with our lifetime of being uncomfortable. How do they expect to service these communities? It is a part of our ethical principles that we uplift, the dignity in all persons. How do you plan on being a social worker? How do you even, I feel like social work is a field that you have to be passionate about. It's not a career that you just pick up like, this is gonna make me money. Because we all know, they say you don't do it for the dollars, you do it for the outcome, right? So how can we go about getting these students that are uncomfortable? I think there has to be like a how you get interviewed for a program, but it has to be like a competency pre-screening, for racial, where do you stand on situations like this? Because we're going to be servicing these communities, and if you have an issue with what, and then it goes back to what you said about I think Kenya, you stated, oh, why is my client not listening to me? Why is this? Why they're being defiant? Why they're being what's the term? There was a term that I spoke about that we said in class. When a client or someone we're working with or family or child is being defiant, we have these labels, but you have to have an understanding of where they're coming from. You know what I'm saying? I feel like as social workers, we shouldn't be judgmental, and that's where everyone goes wrong. So I just feel like we should feel comfortable with calling out these individuals who don't fit, because that would give one social worker a bad name. Everyone has they're tainting our field and what we plan to do. I feel like that's a part of revolutionizing the I'm sorry, Eddie, he's snapping. And it's, but yeah, I don't mean to ramble on that, but it's just, what can professors do? What can the directors do for the program when students are coming in? How can we structure, how can we get it like a national structure? Like, okay, you have to pass this screening to see if you even fit as an individual, because I don't think being a social worker is something you turn off when you go home. The only difference is it's your character, it's your personality. The only difference is you're filtering yourself in a professional manner. I feel like this is a profession that is just, we all have to embody the characteristics of what it takes to be a social worker: empathy, compassion for others, you know, love, you know, light and love. You have to already have that. It's not something that can be taught. And we just have to find a way to kind of like fish, you know, the sort them out, because they stick out, you know. And then goes back to you, Devin. Sometimes professors aren't aware. They're aware of racism, but they're not so aware of what's taking place in the classroom. I could just speak for myself that, you know, I'm in my BSW program. I go to Mercy College, and I have a group chat, you know, with my cohorts. We have a group chat. And then throughout the summer, you know, with the whole Black Lives Matter situation, one of my colleagues who is Caucasian, it's a mixed group of us. My colleague, you know, she's Caucasian. She's only Caucasian. She's also uncomfortable. She was also uncomfortable about the topic in the classroom as well. You know, and then I noticed that she didn't post anything on social media in support of Blackout Tuesday, you know, anything in support. She was just going, she lives in a town that if she don't want to see Black people, she doesn't have to. I don't know, for lack of better words, if she doesn't want to see any minorities, she doesn't really have to, you know. She lives on a lake, you know what I'm saying? So it was just kind of upsetting me, and I posted a video on Instagram, upsetting me that how do you have these conversations with your cohorts that aren't, you know, acknowledging the disparities, that's not acknowledging what we're going through. So I just feel like maybe we could, you know, contacted my professor, who was everyone's, you know, she's the head of our program, and just said, hey, can we, you know, kind of speak about this? We had an orientation, and that was we had an orientation midsummer about it. You know, we have to basically advocate for ourselves. I guess what these trainings are, these town halls are basically gonna give us the courage to just speak up more about this and make our professors, if they're not aware, because we can't really say everyone's aware of what's going on and really, you know, turning a side eye to it. We just have to be, you know, advocate more and just say, hey, I don't like this, or this is what's happening to me in my field placement. I have a job that was supposed to be my field placement as well, that my supervisor basically told me the other day that I should have more grace because I was telling him to keep his boundaries. So, you know what I'm saying? Not only am I a woman, I'm a Black woman, and I'm a young Black woman as well, but I'm not hesitant to speak up for myself or others. That's why I'm a social worker. That's why I'm going to be, you know, that's why I'm in the field. So I don't think we should be shy to express ourselves in a manner in which is appropriate, authentic to how they made us feel, you know, and true to ourselves. So I just, you know, I just want to encourage everyone to just be true to yourself, you know what I'm saying? And just have, we all know why we're in this field. Everyone that's on this Zoom right now, we're basically here because we want to make a change in some way, somehow, and or we just experience, or you probably just want to learn more. But I just feel like everyone should just feel comfortable within themselves, knowing that this is not right, and I'm gonna do something to make it better. And that's all I just wanted to say. And thanks for sharing, everybody.
Hi, can I say something? Hi, my name is Tanya Tucker. I'm from Newark, New Jersey. I'm a social worker at MSW, and I am a field instructor also in my office. And I interview our prospective interns that are going to come into the office way before. I interview them at least 2 or 3 times before they come to the office, and I give them the absolute lowdown on everything that's going to happen to them, especially if they're coming from a different community. If anyone knows Newark, New Jersey, we are a African-American, Spanish, Latino community with a little gentrification going on, but where our office is located, we are heavily African-American. And I let them know that this is what it is. At any given time, anybody can come walk in the door. So if you're looking for a pretty nice office setting, this is not what you're gonna get. And because of me being honest with them about what is going to happen to them for the year, they have turned us down. We've had brave folks that have decided to come, but midway they couldn't handle it. And you know, the bottom line is that everybody's not into social work, being a social worker for the same reasons. And I know that, you know, everybody's not necessarily here for the same reasons. It's a culture shock. It's a generational shock. It's especially for BSW students that have no experience in coming out for their first internship, no job, they have no experience with case management. It's a cultural shock, experience shock, period. And some of them just can't deal with it. And that's okay. I believe students that are going through the process, I'm old school, so I'm a little older African-American woman, and I'm running around. That's why my camera's off. I look at our students a little bit differently. I'm honest. I keep everything honest with them. I talk very, very plain. I don't scapegoat them. I let them know that the social work history that we have been given is one-sided. It was not designed for us. It did not consider us. I let them know that, you know, a lot of what you learn, it's foundational, but it's not going to be practical. It's not going to be practiced. I let them know that, you know, this is something that you're going to have to learn as you go. And I'm going to be there to guide you. Now, I've had students that have had bad experiences in the classroom, and I've went to our meetings and I've brought up the questions because students have been put off when asking, you know, the question, because I believe that students have a right to ask a question as well as challenge the professors in the classroom. And if they're not given a safe space in the classroom, then myself as the field instructor should be that person, and I become that person. I'm one of those old school social workers that will kick down a door for my clients as well as my students, because I don't want them to walk into a situation and not have enough information about a profession that they're going to be in for the next 20, 30 years. I've experienced being the only African-American woman sitting at the table. I've experienced being within an organization, a large organization, where they say that we are diverse, but no one looks like me. They come from other countries, but no one looks like me. So the word diversity doesn't necessarily mean diverse when we're talking about different shades of color or different communities. It just means other countries sometimes. So I need our students, our interns to have a better understanding and perspective. And I become that protector because I am older. I become the mother hen sometimes, and that's sometimes you could say that's a barrier that I overtake. But because we have professors that have been in these positions for so very long, and they're holding on to an old way of teaching our newer students that are exposed to so much that's going on in the world, they have new ideas, they have new thoughts, they've experienced new things, they have questions about why is this way and why are we not thinking outside of the box. And as a social worker and an instructor and a field instructor, I feel like if they can't ask the question and be in a safe and feel safe, I should be able to do that for them. Thank you.
Tanya, thank you so much. And Tanya, there needs to be more field instructors like you. I just love it. Thank you. That also raises another thing of who actually we have representation. Who's represented when we think about faculty, when we think about field instructors, who's actually represented, right? So this comes up. I've looked at this within my own social work program when I was going through social work, and now even in nonprofits, who's at the top, who's in leadership positions. That is important, and that's a conversation that also needs to be had. That's also something that needs to be brought into this discussion, because that has implications, right? If we have more, and not just diverse, because we talk about, oh, diversity, but it's, you know, who do we have? Who do we have at the table? Who do we have in high leadership positions who are able to make change, who are able to start that conversation, who are able to engage in that conversation? So we need more people like you, Tanya. Thank you. But also that just reminds me of the importance of not just the training. We've talked about the training for professors, for field instructors, but also looking at representation and who do we have, right? How do we make sure that our schools of social work are diverse, and not just diverse, that we are looking at schools of social work that actually represent and reflect the communities and actually are set up in a way that's going to be able to advance the work of racial equity. That's, I think that can be added as another goal when we think about training, and, you know, and not just training for professors, because we say training all the time. Oh, they just need more training. Sometimes that's not effective. Sometimes it's more than, I think somebody talked about consultation, and there has to be a continuous engagement, not just this one-time training. Oh, we just need more training. Training, consultation, whatever that looks like, and also need more representation. So that's another piece of it, because the experience of BIPOC faculty, field instructors, supervisors is quite different from the experience of white faculty, white supervisors, white field instructors. So that also has to be brought into that conversation as well. So again, thank you, Tanya.
I'm sorry if I interrupted, but I wanted to comment a little bit on like the experience. Like, I'm currently a BSW senior right now. And, you know, I often notice that the professors in the classroom, especially white professors, are always telling the white students, please don't be afraid to speak your mind. Please don't be afraid to make a mistake. But there was this one incident that happened last semester that really marked me in the way that professors come about things. And it was, we were talking about racism and biases, and there was a Black female who's talking about her experience, what it is to be a Black single mother, and why she lost hope in a lot of things. And she was, you know, raising her voice. She was getting upset because this is an extremely emotional issue for her, right? And I feel like after she gave, you know, she talked for like around 10 minutes and she was, you know, crying, and I didn't see any effort of the professor or any other students to like comfort her in a way. And I got really mad, because honestly, it really pissed me off, because I was like, white students can talk about and make mistakes, but when there's a person, especially a Black woman, who wants to talk about her experience, it's like kind of like, oh, but what you're gonna talk about isn't welcome. Like, when your experience or what you want to voice about isn't welcome. And it really pissed me off, because like I said, again, there was like barely any support for her. The whole room was silent, and it wasn't until like he was like, okay. And like, I don't know, I just felt like he disregarded her. And I personally afterwards went up to her, you know, and it hurt me, because she told me, she's like, do you think I was too much? I was like, not at all. It's your experience. Like, you are allowed to be angry. You're allowed to have this experience. Like, you're allowed to voice your opinion. Like I'm like, you are so valuable to the classroom. I'm like, please don't ever think like what you're talking about isn't valuable or isn't entitled because you're angry. Who cares? And if you're angry, I'm like, you have every right to be angry. But because of she was more afraid of how her experience impacted the white students than about her like having these emotional, you know, like trying to get these emotional rage off of her chest. You know, it just really upset me. And like I said, again, it's like, it kind of gave me really annoyed that white professors are always telling white students it's okay to be like, kind of, it's okay to say racist comments, right? Because you'll learn from it. But if like, you know, a Black student or a POC student wants to talk about their experience, it's more like, oh, that's really awkward, it's really uncomfortable. So like, no, don't really talk about it, you know? And it's again this the thing of appeasing like white students and white professors. Like, why we have to silence our voices to make you feel okay? I don't care how you feel. Like, me personally, like, and like, I've had so many incidents with like white students in the program where I had this one incident where these group of white girls who like really like, it's like a whole glitch of, and like in the program, we're talking again about racism, and they're using their Black boyfriends as an excuse of them not being racist. And I was looking around, I'm like, is this okay to everybody? I literally, I was like, I think I'm on like the Matrix or something, because I can't believe everyone's just like okay with this. Like, this is not okay. And I raised my hand and I was like, I don't think having Black boyfriends excuse you from being racist. And to this day, I still feel like that group of girls do not like me, and that's okay because I don't need them to like me. But why is it me having to call them out? Why couldn't the professor be like, call them out on their stuff? It's always the student. And like, you know, and as students, we always risk, like, I always have to feel like, oh, if I say something, I might get expelled from this school. I guess this is my last class, you know? But it's unfortunate that it's like we often have to be the ones that go out of our way to call people out, go out of our way to educate, and it just gets tiring. Like, no more. So, sorry for the rant.
No apologies necessary. Ev, thank you so much. I'm just calling you Ev for short, but Evelyn. Thank you so much for speaking to that. Two things that I heard you say that came up before, and also being highlighted in the chat again, is yes, white comfort trumps Black liberation. That the theme is all right. The theme that continues to come up that I see in my own organization, that I see in thinking back to my own field placement, that the experience of white people and the feelings of white people are more important than the feelings of Black people and just BIPOC, right? So that there's this sense, again, that we're privileging and we need to make sure that they're okay. The other thing that brings up for me is that also I've been thinking about this term, the emotional labor, that there's emotional labor that we hold on to. There's a burden that's placed on us, A, because we're dealing with traumatic stress in organizations. B, we can't actually speak to it because we don't want to come across as, oh, well, no, you're being too aggressive, you're being you're being too angry, etc. And C, we want to make sure that we're not making people, specifically white people, uncomfortable. And then we're being called to then, educate, disrupt, and be responsible for doing that when we don't have allies in that space to be able to feel supported to do that. So this is something that, when you were speaking, just kind of resonated for me, my own experience of, wow, the burden, the emotional burden that as BIPOC, as myself as a Black woman, being in these spaces, both in school and now as a practitioner, seasoned practitioner, that it comes up, the themes may look different, but it's the same, the emotional burden that I can't, where do I go? And then I have to make sure that I'm not making other people uncomfortable. I have to make sure that I'm okay, let me just keep myself quiet. The emotional labor, emotional burden that's not evenly distributed across the space. That some people are having to experience that way more than other people, not so much, depending on how they're situated and positioned.
Hi. Okay. This is Grace. I have a lot of thoughts to add, but I'm just going to stick to something that I've been thinking about for a little while. One of the things that I remember, so I went to social work school like 7 years ago. I guess I graduated 6 years ago. And I remember through my, a few things of my field placement experience, which is like, one, it felt like a rush dash at the end to find me a placement. Even though I was, I think I did everything on time. I was really communicative. I feel like I was doing everything that I was asked to do to secure my placement. And, very last minute, it was like, this is what we found. And I had a placement where there was like 14 interns. So as a result, there was a certain amount of like, support missing. And it became kind of obvious how certain people's like clinical supervision or projects were being prioritized over others. And it was very much, like white colleagues or white classmates getting to do certain things without things becoming available to all of us to participate in. And I just remember realizing that no one ever taught me or told me like what my, what is the process if you're having a grievance or an issue at your placement. And my field instructor unfortunately wasn't so supportive, as people have mentioned. And I've thought a lot about this, where I feel like, you know, I think one, for me being a first generation, like college student and grad student, put me at a disadvantage to really know how to navigate like higher education. So it was like, I think now that I've finished and that I've been in the field, that I've been able to learn certain things. I'm like, oh, if I had known that, I'll, you know, so I think I tried my best to like mentor people who I know are going to social work programs that are students of color, especially, on how to navigate that. But I think there should be some level of awareness that maybe for a lot of people, at least I think, like, of BIPOC people, like they might be first generation to navigate these systems, and there's a certain amount of privilege, I think, for a lot of white people where they're not first generation. They know how to navigate these systems and advocate for themselves and get the placements that they want, and that shouldn't happen. But I think, you know, even just creating some sort of like network to support, you know, people who are in the field, maybe to support incoming students to learn to navigate those things and how to advocate for themselves, since they may not, I'm not going to say usually, but they may not have that available to them.
Hello? Hello? Hi, I'm going to show my face briefly because I don't know what my children are going to do. Hello, everybody. My name is Monique Russell, and I am unapologetically Black. I've been Black all my life. I'm a first generation everything in this country. My parents came here not by a boat, which I have heard. They have not come here. They flew here and had to get educations here and emphasize the importance of education for us. That being said, I think it is critical that we work with our allies, simply because the most unfortunate part about even being educated and being outspoken is that there's seats at certain tables that they're not going to offer us. And fortunately, I went to a school where my allies made sure that they put me in a seat and pushed the seat closer to the table, so that I could be heard. I even in the classroom setting, I was more open to assist the ally in understanding even the simple things like why it's not okay to ask to touch our hair, than I was absolutely resistant, because allies are important. Also, in connection with being the first generation here, I have to absolutely agree. We're at a great disadvantage. Our parents come and see what they see on TV and hear what they heard, but there are ways of life that we don't get access to unless we ask. And I think that, again, that it's important to have allies to know even what we can do. And lastly, representation is one of the hardest topics for me to discuss, because I have also had very poor representation from people of color. I think a lot of unlearning has to happen. I think that's the greater part of the issue. And I do give grace, which is an unpopular opinion. I give grace because I think unlearning is important. I think training is cool, but generation upon generation upon generation has been taught that people of color are this particular thing. And we encounter people who have been taught that, and as social workers, we don't use our skills. We automatically bump our chest up against it because we're tired, which is justified, but not really effective. If you have someone who's willing to listen, then you have someone who's willing to listen. After generations, I had a class where someone who we're actually still friends, she did not know that certain things that she was doing was racist because she had been raised all these years. And this is what her family, a very traditional Italian family, had told her it was okay. And so I go, oh no, you can't do that. No, that you can't do. Okay, I understand why but no, you can't do that. And if someone's willing to do that and you create an ally, you also create someone who has a seat at the table. So I plan to be the representation with the history that I come in with, being that I had to learn everything on my own, being first generation. So I plan to come in with the representation, but better than training, I guess my belief is there's unlearning that has to happen. I believe there's unlearning that has to happen in the police department because they're taught a culture of people of color. People are taught these things about people of color. And as a social worker, it's something that I cannot, even though I'm tired, I have 8 nephews, a very Black husband. All of us are people of color. I'm tired and I'm afraid every day. We don't even go out at night because of it as a family, collectively. But I think that it's important that we also have to consider that people are taught this way and that they need to be given some grace. I'm not extreme, but some grace to unlearn those who are willing to unlearn. And those who don't, you really have to consider they're not fertile ground. So no matter what you say to them, it's not a place where they're willing to accept or willing to learn. So is it really effective to just stand there and scream at the top of your lungs with somebody who's not willing to learn as opposed to somebody who is and who can assist you with getting a seat at the table to be heard? Okay.
Monique, thank you. And Grace, thank you for speaking before Monique. 2 things that I want to speak to in terms of it helps us to think about goals. Oh my God, Monique, I just have to say unlearning. Yes, I've been thinking about that as well, that there's things that I have to unlearn in this work, right? And something that you brought up that we've talked about before is that even if we have enough representation, that doesn't necessarily mean there's still unlearning that needs to happen for all of us, because we are all in this system. We are all immersed in this. And there's so many narratives that we've learned, particularly within social work education, that we need to unpack and unlearn. So thank you, because I think that it's not just training. It's not just, oh, well, give them more training. It's actually an unlearning. Before you can actually learn something new, you have to unlearn some of what's problematic, these problematic narratives that continue on. So thank you just for that word. Oh my God, I love it. Unlearning. So when we think about diversity of the faculty, diversity of field instructors, that it's not just, okay, well, we're just gonna hire more diverse staff. That many times that happens and nothing actually changes, because that's not actually, there's more to it. So thank you, Monique, for highlighting that. And Grace, I wanna go back to, a goal that I'm seeing from what you were talking about in terms of, it resonated with my own experience, because I had a particular problem in my first year field placement was like horrible. And I had to advocate, and I didn't quite know how to, I didn't know, but I had to figure it out, how to advocate for, no, this is not working for me. And especially knowing myself as a black student, a black female student, ooh. So how do we make sure that students, so there's 2 things, right? There's what the adults, professors, those in leadership positions, whether that be field instructors, professors, or practitioners, and also students. What needs to happen with students? And something that was brought up before about the application process and how we're actually screening. So there's that piece. And then there's also a piece of, well, with students have a problem, and particularly, we want to make sure that it's equitable, and we want to make sure that it's a place where students feel safe, particularly students of color, feel safe to be able to advocate for themselves, to be able to express, this is not working for me. I need something different. Instead of feeling like, I just have to just kind of take this and suffer. And then the emotional labor continues. So we want to disrupt that process as well. So what is the process of having a grievance, navigating systems? And again, not everybody has that, right? Not everybody comes in with that experience and that knowledge to know how to do
Good evening, everybody. I just want to, talk about the point that Grace spoke about, mentorship and representation. I was a social work student something like 25 years ago. And granted, not in this country, but racism is all over this world. I'm from the United Kingdom. And so I went to social work school back in London. I loved the profession of social work because it's allowed me to work in the field in this country. You know, I've lived here now for 20 years, but my social work school was formative in my practice, and I want everybody that's here tonight to be encouraged about the discussion we're having, because I have to say that, when I was in school, going through my internship, the same struggles that people are talking about, like I had that, 25 years ago, like not being able to find an internship. And I really was like coming to the point where I didn't think I was going to be able to kind of to make it. But I lucked out because I had what we called a practice teacher back then, who was a woman of color. And she was somebody that I just literally cling to, because at that time, my program was probation, and back in the UK, social workers are probation officers are social workers. So so I was in this criminal justice field, and I had this awesome practice teacher who was a woman of color, and I clung to her, and she was completely awesome. And it kind of like helped me so much, because to see her in that role and to help me navigate what I was doing at the time, just filled me with so much hope. It empowered me. And when I thought I was failing, she really kind of like held me up. And so even though my whole history with school, the whole education system, was not something I enjoyed, because the education system does not serve people of color, and our histories are completely kind of hidden. So I just went into education with this idea of like, it's just a means to an end. It's just a means to an end. I just got to get through it. I'm hurting. It bothers me, but I just got to get through it. It doesn't really, mean anything. I just got to do this to get to what I got to get to. And so, the point I'm trying to make is that allyship, representation, is so powerful. Be in those spaces, push forward, because I still remember her. I know her. I remember her name. I still remember this teacher that I had. This, she was much like Tanya. I remember her, and in my lowest moments, I remember things that she taught me, and that has been able to kind of like anchor me, from different agencies, different situations. And I can't tell you how important it is in order to mentor. As social workers, we give, but also we have a responsibility to kind of like help others, come in. So once we become more enlightened, and we become, we become kind of like more, educated as to, what systems are doing, to our clients, then we can also, become, powerful, actors for change. And so I just want to just mention that.
Yes, Thank you for that. I want to add just how important mentorship is. So thank you for bringing up that topic, because it's been, a few people brought up the fact that they were kind of like alone in their school or just in their cohort altogether. My first social work class that I ever took, which was like my sophomore year, my professor was a Black woman. And the same thing as you, Caroline, I clung to her. And she's been my mentor for 4 years now. And without her mentorship, I would not be anywhere near where I am right now, because she prepared me for all the hoops and the obstacles that I was going to have to jump through. She told me all the things that no one was going to tell me. She taught me how to navigate this profession as a Black woman. And that is, Tanya, you were talking about how you as a field instructor, how you work with your students, and that's so important, because I didn't have that from my field instructor at all. I think a lot of us share that same experience, but I did have someone else who kind of had my back in other aspects. And so I was very lucky and blessed in that sense. And I wish that everyone had that. And I completely understand that that's not, always how it goes, because most of our professors are white or just don't look like us. And so, or even if they do, sometimes we still don't align with their values or the things that they're saying or their approach to the work. And so I think it's just so important to find, someone that you can work with who understands what your mission is and kind of works with you to get there.
So I'll jump in. This is kind of like a like a fourfold kind of statement, just to reflect on some things that I've heard. Kind of jumping back to, I think it was Evelyn, who spoke about like professors and the trauma that they often perpetuate. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that within our field, a lot of our white counterparts weaponize Black political leaders to silence Black voices. They love using Dr. King to shut us up. I think it's funny because many of these individuals don't even have a context of what happened after the March on Washington. They don't even know that the Black Panthers are the reason why we have a free breakfast program in this country. So I think that it's so important to address that as social work and every profession becomes more Blacker, browner, indigenous, radical, that we are going to challenge and deconstruct these concepts, including mental health. Like, from my standpoint, I take on a spiritually integrative psychodynamic approach where I'm incorporating indigenous spirituality and Blackness and centering that in the client interventions, because we know that ancestral magic is not always a psychosis. We know that spirit work is not necessarily something that is wrong. It's just pathologized because it is not white. Okay. So then the concept of diversity, and speaking of someone who goes to a predominantly Latinx institution, our diversity data is public, and we have 76% of our professors that are white in the social work program. We have 16% who are Latin, and then 6% who are Black. However, it's false diversity because within the context of the Latin diversity box that they check, only 0.06 of them are actually Black. So we really just have a bunch of white professors who speak different languages. And it's understanding proximity to whiteness. It's understanding how whiteness has been operationalized to perpetuate this false monolithic ideology that we all have the same experience because we are Latin, or we are Muslim, or we are from wherever we are, when really pigmentocracy and colorism run just as deep in every place that we go throughout the globe. And then in the context of diversity, that brings me to like, and I'm still a master's student, so I'm still learning about like continuing education credits, but within the NASW as an organization, as I've looked into certain things like continuing education, I've noticed that even within postgraduate, a lot of the post-education credits and workshops still center around whiteness and capitalism. Like, I believe that, Kim Young, like I follow her on Instagram and she has amazing webinars, and yet none of these are eligible for continuing education credits because you have to pay like $600 just to get that checkbox. And I think it's so important for this organization to recognize that whiteness has been weaponized as a key holder to who can have the floor and who can challenge the structures and systems that have been put into place. And I think that as we continue to have the conversations around diversifying, the organization should think about that. Maybe there should be a process in which social workers who can submit their kind of presentations for recommendation. And then, you know, think about like, is $600 is a lot of money. Like, I don't got that coin. I live in New York City. That's part of my rent, you know? And then the last thing is understanding change. And this came in my class this week, right? So my professor, who was great, she was very much an ally. At the same time, you know, when I was taught, she brought up Breonna Taylor, and that got extremely heated. And the class being, you know, radical, talked about how change needs to be happening. And her response was, well, change is a slow process. And I combat that by saying that change is not slow. Whiteness inhibits and stops change from happening. Because we know that when the Black Panthers came about and said, we're gonna use the law to our benefit to stop this police brutality, within like 2 weeks, laws were passed to stop them from doing that. And so thinking about, you know, our process of change, because we are agents of change, are we actually utilizing that to bring about equity for Black and Brown and Indigenous people? Or are we just creating perceptions of change to coddle whiteness until you give us the rite of passage to say, okay, now you have your chance to feel a little more comfortable while we get to bask in the ambiance of what we have had for generations or over 400 years.
Eddie, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Just like seriously, snap, 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 snaps. Thank you. So real. And I just love everything that you said. And yeah, that, I mean, and then something that came up into the chat about change, right? And change is only slow. Change does not have to be slow. And change actually can happen very fast if everyone is on board. And if, you know, change can happen very fast. But we have to be aware of where the change points are, and then where are the points where change is not, there's going to be some pushback. You know, in this work, there is going to be pushback because we are calling people to, we're calling out systems and structures that people have become very comfortable with. Devin, do you have anything to add, or, because I am looking at the time, I know we're, you know, going to be, you know, closing out soon.
Yeah, I think Sam was about to start wrapping us up. But before that does happen, I do want to thank everyone so much for all of your just comments and the participation, and the comments in the chat were also really great, and we are reading them and we are taking tons of notes from them. So many goals were created just in this last hour and a half. So thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it, and so happy to be doing this work with you.
Yes, I want to second that. Thank you so much, everyone, for just being here. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, your feelings, etc. This is how the work starts. We're just going to continue it. This is how change starts. Thank you all for being here. I just really appreciate having the opportunity to be in this space, particularly during this time. So thank you.
I want to thank everyone too. And I did put the link for our next one in the chat. We've already scheduled out the next several months of these, and the next two are going to continue to focus on schools of social work. Amelia, can you put the registration link for the next one in the chat so people can register now for it and they can be prepared? I want to again thank you so much for providing this valuable feedback and for helping us. I have about 17 or 18 goals, and I know I missed some because you were saying so many things at once. So I will rewatch this and I will work on reframing those goals and like putting them in, and then I'll send them to Cecily and Devin to review. I know they took notes, and I just want to again thank you for doing this work. And I want to reiterate that BIPOC people won't carry the work of this. So while you're carrying the conversations and identifying the problems and using your voice to do that. The whole goal of this is for you to not carry the work and the research and all of that, only to the point that you want to get involved with that and build skills, research skills, use the research as assignments in your class, you know, that you can submit to your teachers, like that type of stuff. I just want to reiterate, our white allies, we're going to depend on you to join these work groups and help carry this load, because we don't want to what's the word you used, Cecily? The emotional labor. Yeah, I like that. I like your word, emotional labor. This is not, we don't want BIPOC people to carry that emotional labor. Like, you need to know that you have a sea of people behind you that will hold that labor and to do the work. Again, can't thank you enough. I hope you've clicked on the link. We will, of course, post this so that we can all rewatch it. And I will definitely be rewatching it several times to try to get all those goals down. And I see that I think we were right. Devin and Cecily and all the other people on here, Tosh, who joined us, Caroline, who joined us in this work, that I think we are right to schedule 3 for schools of social work, because we're going to need those next 2. We're going to end up with about 40 goals for schools of social work. So I can't wait to see you in October, and look for the email. We'll send everything out, and, you know, continue giving us that feedback, continue telling us how we need to improve at New York State. We hear you, and we promise we will make our changes. So have a good night. Take time to relax, take time to heal yourselves, and we will see you in a month when we continue this conversation.